Kicking off our list at number 10, ancient curse. We'll kick this list off in ancient Egypt, then we'll work our way up to more modern stuff. You know how it is. When officials found the tomb of Ankh-Mahor, a pharaoh official that lived 4,000 years ago, they also found a warning, a message, a curse rather. It was written right there on the wall. That's how you know that you're f***ed. Buried in a mastaba, an above ground massive tomb, held this warning. It reads, "Might do against this my tomb, the same shall be done to your property." Yeah, you mess with my stuff, I'll haunt you and your family. How does that sound? Deal? Alright, deal. It also warns of Ankh-Mahor's knowledge of secret spells and magic, and it threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing ghosts. Yeah, this pharaoh official wasn't f***ing around, that's for sure. Number 9, remember death. Yes, can't forget. Turning the calendars a bit forward now to 1794 AD. A man named James Leeson was 38 at the time of his passing. Now his grave is in New York, and it's one of the most visited graves ever. The message left over on his tombstone is quite simple. It's just a few symbols. Some Harry Potter stuff going on. That's all it takes on an otherwise standard headstone. There's an hourglass with wings, a flaming urn, and a stonecutter's tool, suggesting that this person may have been a mason. There's one line at the top that was decoded a century later. In 1889, somebody finally figured out another message, and this message said, "Remember death." So now that we know this, those symbols become a bit more eerie. An hourglass with wings, that symbolizes time passing quickly, and the flaming urn represents a soul's immortality. Nice. How lovely. Again, on my headstone, it'll say like and or subscribe. Number 8, Ellen Shannon. In 1870, we obviously didn't have the same safety requirements as we do today. Wemyss wasn't born yet. We didn't have anything, right? No safety hats, nothing like that. For example, if you wanted to read a little novel before bed, you didn't have a kind Kindle with you. You didn't even have a nightlight for that matter, but you did have a kerosene lamp. How lucky are you? That's horrible. That's pretty much all you had back then. Ellen had used R.E. Danforth's non-explosive burning fluid, and well, dare I say, the obvious happened. You know the title of this list. Pretty grim. Her tombstone in Pennsylvania doesn't shy away from the cause of her untimely death. See, in a time before Twitter, this was the best way to spread awareness on otherwise a horrible product. Ellen Shannon's tombstone reads, "In memory of Ellen Shannon, aged 26 years old, who was fatally burned on the 21st of March 1870 by the explosion of a lamp filled with R.E. Danforth's non-explosive burning fluid." Yeah, that's a tragedy, of course, and that's a horrible way to go out, but I admire that the family boldly put R.E. Danforth himself publicly as the cause of her death. They put him on blast, for lack of a better term. Number 7, Midnight Mary. Back in 1872 in New Haven, Connecticut, Mary E. Hart, aka Midnight Mary, was placed in a casket and buried, thought to be dead. But really, she was still alive. Yeah, just unconscious. She was accidentally buried alive. How terrible is that? And Mary's tombstone has a lot of information, all things considered. The massive slab of pink stone reads, "At high noon, just from and about to renew her daily work in her full strength of body and mind, Mary E. Hart had fallen, remained unconscious until she died at midnight, October 15th, 1872. Born December 16th, 1824. And then underneath there's one line that reads, "The people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away." Alright, that one line's a bit much. Who added that? That's up. Many have noted that this phrase is from the Old Testament, sure, but the tale of her being buried alive suggests that there might be a midnight curse lurking about. Either way, that is a horrible, horrible way to go out. That's probably my worst fear. That's my new worst fear. Number 6, ancient entanglement. Alright, once a thriving, beautiful city in ancient Rome, Pompeii was sadly destroyed in 79 AD. Now, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius buried the ancient city in volcanic ash, and excavation didn't begin until the 18th century, much later. And after a full century of careful excavation, the city was then reopened to the public once again. And now we're at the point where we're uncovering even more art and even more messages from that time. Yeah, messages found on the walls of ancient buildings in Pompeii. There's one exchange that I love, personally. It's about two men named Successus and Severus. And here's the message. Let's do this. Successus, a weaver, loves the innkeeper's girl. Her name was Iris. She, however, did not love him. T. Now still he begs her to have pity on him. Now his rival Severus wrote back on, again, said wall. He added to this message and he wrote, "Goodbye, envious one. Why do you get in the way? Submit to a handsomer man and one who is being treated very wrongly and good looking. I have spoken. I have written all that there is to say. You love Iris, but she does not love you." Yeah, a lot of drama going on, right? And then Mount Vesuvius randomly erupted and then nobody settled their beef ever. Yeah, this is why you don't waste time in love triangles, okay? Just let her go. Hit that thumbs up and let her go. Mount Vesuvius could go off any day, and you're stuck in an entanglement. Get out of here. It's not 79 AD anymore. Number 5, Eugene. 1929, Ohio. A corpse just randomly appeared on the road, just right in the middle of the road. Just 1920s things, I guess. There was an address found on this man's body, but that address led to an empty plot of land. They also had no name for this man as well, so they named him Eugene. They just named him after a local neighbor. That's a pretty odd exchange. Like, hey, we're gonna name this guy after you. No worries, yeah, we just found him. They used this body as an attraction. He was a mummy that people would visit when they swung by in town. Like a museum attraction, only not a pharaoh and a man from the 1920s in Ohio. Little different. Now, when people started to ask more about this mummy in Ohio, this random ass mummy, locals all agreed to finally lay the stranger to rest underground and not, as an attraction, ideally. So now when you see his grave, it just says Eugene, found dead 1929 and buried 1964. Yeah, I bet so many people see this and they're so confused. They're like, what? Send them this video and be like, hey, you're not gonna believe number 5. Watch this guy. Watch this guy with a beanie explain it. He's much better at it than me. Number 4. Mary Jane McCune. Mary Jane McCune was the wife of one James Farage. Now, she was born in 1838 and she passed away in 1855. Underneath Mary Jane's name is a message on how she passed. And fair warning, like the others, this is quite grim. It says Mary Jane McCune was bitten by a rabid coyote, developed rabies, became violent, and was then smothered with feather bed. Holy shit. Again, imagine just seeing that in the middle of nowhere. It's like, Todd, what the f***? Barry. The story even recalls that the husband James was away for work at the time all this happened, and he only found out what happened as soon as he got back. That's so tragic. That's the thing with these old resting places. They have tons of information because that was the only way, really, to spread it. That was your legacy. It was literally written in stone. Rabies, smothered. I'm like, oh my god, can we leave some of this out? This is pretty dark. Number 3, KV 55. This tomb was found in the Valley of the Kings by Edward Ayrton back in 1907. It was discovered right next to King Tut's tomb. It was a big deal. But the reason we call this tomb by a number rather than, King Tut's tomb or another name is because we have no idea who it was made for. It's just bare, which is extremely odd for an ancient tomb like this. But as you walk down the 20 steps towards KV 55, you'll notice only a few markings on the entrance. Markings that show that the entrance was once widened since its first cut, along with its ceiling being raised higher. So again, somebody important was in here. It's just a matter of why they were important, right? What did they do? What happened? A little bit of history. The only hint as to who is buried remains on the walls, and it's in one hieroglyph. And that hieroglyph translates to, "The evil one shall not live again." Okay, well, I sure hope not. Whatever happened in there, I've seen the mummy, I'm all set. Let's keep it shut. Number 2, bone compass warning. Okay, just because we've been talking about graves doesn't mean these messages have to be written or carved or drawn per se. Sometimes these messages can be as simple as leaving animal bones on the ground. Yeah, that ought to speak for itself. You see that in the woods, you're on your way. See you later. In St. Augustine, for example, the remains of a donkey were found buried underground, and judging from the skull, it had been clearly hunted down by humans, right? It was very not normal. Now that's not the mysterious part. The mysterious part here is that all the bones have been carefully separated. There's no marks to suggest that any tools were used at all, so researchers believe that this animal wasn't meant for food. Maybe sacrifice? I don't know, it's odd. Either way, it's pretty dark. The limbs were placed to point north and south directly. They used this donkey as a compass. How rude is that? Donkeys in that area in Florida in the 17th century, that's not bizarre. But the way that these bones were buried, that definitely is. What's the message here, right? What's the point if there is one? If you reach the pile of bones, you've gone too far? What is this? Someone help me out. And finally, number 1, Paris catacombs. We have to end with this massive tomb. It was built in the late 18th century, and the Paris catacombs are massive. The place is literally filled with bones, so of course it needs to have a warning before you enter, right? That's probably fair. That would suck to accidentally stumble upon. You're about to walk into a room full of heads. Yeah, heads up. Since opening day, there's been a message carved above the entrance of the Paris catacombs, and that message translates to "Stop in the name of love." No, I'm just kidding, it doesn't. It translates to "Stop, this is the empire of the dead." And at that point, I would go, okay.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Cursed Grave. Located in Gippsland, Australia, or Gippsland, I'm sorry. There is a grave site inscribed with a curse. The grave belongs to James Mitchell, a man who died after falling down a mine shaft. His grave reads, and I quote, "Oh, let my sudden doom a warning be to all. Here while thou bendeth over thy tomb, thou may as quickly fall." If you say that curse out loud while at his grave, legend goes you will unexpectedly die within the next couple of days. In our 9th spot, we have the Weeping Woman. Legend goes that a woman named Charlotte M. Sitton haunts the Adelaida Cemetery in California. Apparently, back in the day, Charlotte lost both of her children due to an epidemic. Being so distraught over her loss, she ended up taking her own life to be with her children once again. According to locals, she by the local school. Now her soul is restless. She hasn't been able to find peace since. It's said that every Friday between 10 to 11:30 p.m., Charlotte appears by her children's grave. You can see her lurking about in a white dress, placing flowers down on her children's graves before heading out into the woods. Coming in at number 8, we have the Bleeding Headstone. The Union Cemetery in Pennsylvania is known to be a pretty haunted one. There's apparently a woman in white that lurks the area, and of course, a headstone that bleeds. The grave belongs to 19th century local William Musser. His relatives tried to replace the tombstone a number of times, but no matter what, blood always seems to continue seeping out of it. Turns out that William was stabbed and bled to death. In fact, on a number of occasions, a knife has appeared on the tombstone. Coming in at number 7, we have the Crypt Keeper. Imagine having a full-on mausoleum for when you die. You're either super rich or super important or both if that happens. Anyways, located in the West Edmiston Cemetery in New York, there's a mausoleum for a woman named Eunice Welch. She died in 1922 while in her 70s due to natural causes. Nothing too eerie or unusual there. But what is spooky is the fact that her mausoleum is home to an undead Crypt Keeper. Apparently, if you knock on the door and wait, you'll hear some rustling from inside. After a few moments, someone will knock back. But if the Crypt Keeper is in a bad mood, he might yell at you to leave. A number of people have done this and have heard his eerie voice talk back to them. Now, you might be wondering, who is this guy that's haunting the mausoleum of this innocent woman? Well, turns out that the mausoleum used to store dead bodies in there during the winter. There wasn't enough storage elsewhere, so they placed the bodies there until the ground thawed so that they could be buried. So it's believed that maybe one of the bodies that was placed there latched onto the area and is now haunting it. In our 6th spot, we have the Black Angel. Now, this one has to be the weirdest one on this whole list. But there's a Black Angel statue located in Fairview Cemetery in Council Bluffs, Iowa, that comes alive at night. Yes, you heard me. Apparently, this statue comes alive at night and flies around the grave. And you don't want to be anywhere near it when it happens, because the legend continues on saying that the statue has been known to shoot fire from its eyes. Those hit by the eye beam will disappear forever. In fact, the statue apparently wasn't always black, but it turned black around the same time that it came alive. So some say that it absorbed the evil from the people buried around it, and the evil caused it to change color. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Black Agnes. In 1899, a wealthy businessman named John Hubbard passed away. But before he did, he had a copper sculpture made to be placed near his grave. The sculpture is of a bare individual draped in cloth with their head tilted upwards. It is said to be of Thanatos. Thanatos in Greek mythology was the personification of death, so kind of fitting. The statue is located in Greenmont Cemetery in Vermont, and of course, it's haunted. Apparently, some have seen its eyes glow red in the middle of the night. Others have heard blood-curdling screams come from her. But the scariest thing is that she has killed a number of people. Apparently, if you sit on her lap, death will befall you within 7 days. So whatever you do not pop a squat on her lap. Moving on to number 4, we have Smiley's grave. In Garland, Texas, there is a single plot for an entire family that all died on the same day. They are known as the Smiley family. You have the mother, Belle Hall, the father, Chas Smiley, and daughters Lilith Merle, Greta May, and Charlena. Turns out that on May 9th of 1927, the dad, Chas Smiley, took the lives of his wife and 3 daughters while in a fit of rage. After he calmed down and realized what he had done, he took his own life by hanging. Rumor has it that if you lay down on the grave at midnight and try to get back up, you won't be able to. That's because the ghost of Chaz Smiley has got you and is trying to pull you down to hell with him. Coming in at number 3, we have Cornelius Vanderbilt. In the 19th century, businessman Cornelius Vanderbilt was one of the richest Americans. As a result, he was laid to rest in a 3-story mausoleum. Now his tomb was something else. It was massive, but also decorated like a Romanesque church in France. But it's also incredibly haunted. A number of people have reported different spooky encounters there. First, we have a female figure that likes to hover around the tomb. Apparently, a woman died nearby after a heavy iron door fell on her. So people think that the ghostly figure they have seen is her. Other people have seen like bright light orbs in the area. And some have seen Cornelius himself. If you try to trespass into the tomb, apparently he will appear in a gray suit and chase you away. And lastly, some visitors claim that when they have taken photos of outside of the mausoleum, that they later found a figure lurking in the back of the photo. Moving on, at number 2, we have Pinewood Cemetery. Pinewood Cemetery in New York is now abandoned, but the spooky legends associated with it still live on. In fact, to this day, taxi drivers hate driving past it. That's because a number of them have seen terrifying things while doing so late at night. Apparently, a number of drivers have picked up passengers nearby heading home. However, while en route, a number of them just vanish from the back seat of the cab into thin air. How eerie. The cemetery is also said to be home of an angel statue that bleeds from its neck. And there's a crumbling mausoleum where people have seen a strange green glowing light orb floating about, right where the coffins used to be. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the vampire grave. Now this is probably one of the creepiest legends out there. So apparently in Lafayette, Colorado, there's this weird grave with the words "Born in Transylvania" etched on it. Local legends say that the grave site belongs to a real-life vampire. In fact, there's a tree growing right on the grave. Legend goes that this tree grew from the stake that killed the vampire. To make things weirder and creepier, sometimes people have seen a tall, slender man in a dark coat with black hair and long fingernails lurking around the grave. Sounds like he's a vampire, maybe mourning the loss of his vampire friend, I don't know. Some have reported him actually sitting on the tombstone itself. And one time, a police chief patrolling the area found a doll with pins stuck through its heart left on top of the grave. Nowadays, it's a popular ghost attraction. People love to go check out the vampire's grave with hopes to get a glimpse of this eerie vampire man.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Kate McCormick. This tombstone truly leaves one of the darkest and saddest stories I have ever heard. This stone reads, Kate McCormick, seduced and pregnant by her father's friend, unwed, she died from abortion, her only choice, abandoned in life and death by family, with but a single rose from her mother, buried only through the kindness of unknown benefactors. Died February 1876, age 21, victim of an unforgiving society. Have mercy on us. The story of what happened to Kate is obviously quite clear in the message and is truly an absolute nightmare. A trip to the cemetery is always a bit of a grim experience, but when you see something like this, it really does take it to a new level. All we can do is hope that wherever Kate is now, she is resting in peace and know that we haven't forgotten her or her story. In our number 9 spot today, we have Herman Harband. Herman decided to have a headstone made ahead of time before his death, but didn't even actually end up getting buried there, which is quite interesting. Herman had a message he wanted to get across, however, and he certainly did just that. It's actually a bit of a sad and terrifying story, and it really shows the place Herman was in when he made it. The stone reads, Herman Harband, born in 1918. My wife Eleanor Arthur of Queens, New York, lived like a princess for 20 years, traveling the world with the best of everything. When I went blind, she tried to poison me, took all my money, all my medication, and left me in the dark alone and sick. It's a miracle I escaped. I won't see her in heaven because surely she's going to hell. Herman absolutely went off, but it definitely seems like he kind of had a right to, because that story is simply terrible. Good news is that Herman ended up getting remarried and he lived a happy and very long life until he passed away in 2011. In our number 8 spot today, we have Francis and Mary Huntrudes. This stone is one of the less sad ones on this list today, thankfully, and while still haunting, it's in more of a poetic or beautiful way. Or at least I think so. This tombstone is from Francis and Mary Huntrudes, and their stone tells the story of their lives and their love. It reads about how they were both born on the same day in 1600. They were married on their shared birthday. They had 12 children together, and then they both passed away on their birthdays just shortly after turning 80. That is quite some love story, and honestly, what are the chances? But the final 2 lines of the text on the tombstone really sum up the story so perfectly. They read, "Each tender heart so fit a match surely could never be. Both in their lives and in their deaths agree." Maybe this match was simply a serendipitous coincidence, but I definitely would like to think otherwise. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Tazacorte Martyrs Memorial. This one is a little different from the others on this list today for a couple reasons. Firstly, these are tombstones for many individuals, and secondly, because there isn't a message left with them that I want to talk about, but instead just the entire eerie nature of the whole situation. This may appear as a gravesite that has been flooded, but it's actually an underwater memorial. In 1570, a group of Jesuit missionaries boarded a ship from Portugal to Brazil. A French pirate named Jacques Souris boarded the ship along with them, and from there, he and his men took the lives of all of the priests. Some of them even had their limbs cut off before they were thrown overboard. The lone survivor of this day was the ship's cook. The memorial features 40 crosses for each of the lives lost, and it is located near the area of the massacre, which is close to La Palma Island, 18 meters below the surface. I might be alone in this belief, but I think that there is just something extremely haunting about an underwater memorial. In our number 6 spot today, we have Jeremy Bibb Balasag. This tombstone goes hand in hand with an absolutely insane story about Jerry's life. The short of it is that Jerry, who is a professional wrestler, ended up vanishing after getting in trouble with the law. He was wanted for charges of fraud, and while no one knew his whereabouts for 6 months, when his mother picked up a magazine one day which featured the victims of the horrible cultist Jonestown massacre, she sadly saw her son's picture alongside all of the others. This led to there being a tombstone, of course, made for Jerry, although his body would have been already buried in California. So, this all happened in 1978, but let's flash forward to 1990. In that year, a man named Ricky A. Weta was arrested for attempting to take someone's life. He was fingerprinted upon his arrest, and who would have thought, Ricky turned out to be none other than the presumed dead Jerry. This whole story was, of course, huge national news because how could this have possibly happened? In the end, Jerry was caught and brought to justice a few separate times, before he passed away in a prison in Nicaragua from a heart attack that was brought on by the heat in the prison, which is a whole separate issue we'll have to save for another video. In our number 5 spot today, we have Martha Jane Mary McCune. Mary's tombstone tells the tale of her final days, and it truly feels like it is something out of a horror movie. Mary was born around 1838 and passed away most definitely not long enough after in 1855. She was pregnant at the time, and the writing on her tombstone really says it all, so I might as well just read it to you. Bitten by rabid coyote, developed rabies, became violent, was smothered with feather bed. Apparently at the time of being bit by this coyote, Mary's husband was out of town for work, and by the time he got back, his wife had already passed away and been buried, and he had absolutely no idea that any of this was happening, which is extremely tragic. It was so horrible that this was the way that Mary's life was taken, and it definitely makes you grateful for modern medicine, although rabies still manages to claim the lives of around 59,000 people per year. In our number 4 spot today, we have Mona Harold Vanny. This tombstone reads as a letter written to Mona from her children, but it certainly is not what you'd be expecting. Instead of the nice and lovely message you might think, Mona's 3 children detail what an absolute nightmare she was to them growing up. The stone reads, "To our mother. You spent your life expressing animosity for nearly every person you encountered, including your children. Within hours of his death, you even managed to declare your husband of 57 years an unsuited spouse or father. Hopefully you are now insulated from all of the dissatisfaction you found in human relationships." Wow, they really did not hold back one little bit. If it makes you feel better, the message that was left on their father's stone was much more kind and loving. I guess one thing is clear, and that is that Buddy, Jackie, and Mike were not messing around. In our number 3 spot today, we have Charles H. Salmon. Charles' tombstone tells the story of a medical malpractice that ended up leading to his death. Basically what happened is that Charles fell ill with a cold and was given medicine to help treat it. Little did he know, but he wasn't given the proper medicine, but was instead given morphine. When he went back to the doctor to explain that he wasn't getting any better, they also gave him morphine, and this caused him to end up overdosing on the drug. It truly is not quite clear how this could have possibly happened, and I'm not sure if Charles' family ever saw any form of justice for this terrible mistake, but it really is just such an awful story. In our number 2 spot today, we have Andrew J. Olsak. Andrew's tombstone is really straight to the point, but it is one of the saddest we have on today's list. His stone reads, "Abandoned in old age by wife and children. May God be more understanding and merciful." There really is a lot to unpack here. First, I have so many questions as to what happened and what led to this abandonment. Second, I have to know if this is his way of sticking it to his family who he claims abandoned him, or if this is more of just a simple goodbye. Either way, whatever the details are behind this story, coming upon this message in a graveyard would certainly make your heart sink a bit, and definitely be one of those things that you just remember. In our number 1 spot today, we have Leo Matlovich. Leo's tombstone is one that is certainly not easily forgotten. This stone doesn't even say his name, but the reason for that will become quite clear. First, we have to tell Leo's story. Leo was a war hero in the Air Force, and he challenged the policy of homosexuality in the military. Through Leo's bravery and activism, he was able to actually change a few things for gay people serving in the military, the effects of which can still be seen today. Despite Leo receiving both a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart for his service, in the end he was still discharged for being a gay man. He ended up passing away in San Francisco in 1988 after complications from HIV/AIDS. His tombstone reads, "A gay Vietnam veteran. While I was in the military, they gave me a medal for killing 2 men and a discharge for loving one." There is nothing I could possibly say that would be more profound than that, so I'll just end off this point by saying Leo and all the things he did and fought for will truly never be forgotten.
Kicking off the list at number 10, Giles Corey. Out of the 27 people who had their lives taken away from them during the 1692 Salem witch trials, 19 were hanged, 7 passed away in prison while serving their sentence, and the last victim was Giles Corey. He refused to plead either innocent or guilty, and the law at the time states you can't be tried otherwise. So what they did next was unimaginable. As his tombstone hints towards, Giles Corey was pressed to death. The townsfolk laid a heavy board on top of the 81-year-old man, and then over the course of 2 days, boulders were slowly added, making the weight more and more unbearable. They were hoping that Giles would admit something, either innocent or guilty, but every time they asked him anything, Giles responded with, "More weight." Yeah, how epic is that? Extremely brave. But sadly, after 2 days of this torture, Giles Corey passed away. He fought for so long and did what he did because if he had gone either of the other 2 ways, Giles would have had his property taken away by the town. But since he passed away, not admitting guilt, he was still in full possession of his estate, which immediately went to his son-in-law. Yeah, Salem witch trials. Not the craziest thing that was happening on this list, to be honest with you. Salem witch trials were, yeah, horrible. Pretty horrible thing to look back on right off the bat. Number 9, Ellen Shannon. Heading over to the late 1800s for this one, and I gotta warn you, this one is pretty dark. In 1870, we obviously didn't have the same safety requirements as we do today, like at all. For example, if you wanted to read before bed, you didn't have a Kindle back in the day, you didn't have an iPad, you didn't even have a nightlight, but you did have a kerosene lamp. Ellen had used R.E. Danforth's non-explosive burning fluid, and well, dare I say it, the obvious happened. Her tomb in Pennsylvania reads in memory of Ellen Shannon, aged 26 years, who was fatally burned March 21, 1870, by the explosion of a lamp filled with R.E. Danforth's non-explosive burning fluid. Yes, that's what it actually says. And it's a tragedy. That's a horrible way to go out, don't get me wrong. But I admire that the family boldly put R.E. Danforth publicly as the cause of death here. She put him on blast. Number 8, victim of the beast. Lily E. Gray was buried in Salt Lake City Cemetery back in 1958. This one is quite recent. As far as tombstones go, this one is the most common looking as well. It's not monumental, I'm sure many have missed it in time. The message written on the stone back in 1958 says, Lily E. Gray, June 6, 1881 to November 14th, 1958. Victim of the beast, 666. Now see, if that 666 wasn't there, I would be like, oh, maybe she was attacked by an animal, maybe like the beast was a natural phenomenon, like, you know, a surfing term for a large wave, or like a risky mountain trail, something like that. The 666 makes it quite specific on who they're referring to here, so that's pretty haunting. The beast sounds like something sinister, something from the underworld. In the book of Revelation, the beast is literally the Antichrist. Not sure what happened here, but the area was also known to have followers of Aleister Crowley. Crowley also referred to himself as the Beast 666. It sounds like an old Hotmail when you add numbers, doesn't it? The Beast 666. Add me. Number 7, the Ouija board. The fact that you can just buy a Ouija board from a Toys R Us now is hilarious to me. That's so creepy. They have glow-in-the-dark Ouija boards. Yeah, just in case the lights go out and you still want to communicate with the dead. And, you know, glow in the dark is fun. It's like people want to get possessed nowadays, right? Where did all this Ouija board madness start? Well, it began with Elijah Bond. Bond was the first person to ever patent the Ouija board, which is a scary feat in itself. A lot of questions already. But when he was buried, he was laid to rest in an unmarked grave. Now, that was back in 1921, mind you, and it wasn't until 2007 until his resting place got an upgrade. A man named Robert Merck found his spot, raised money to get him a tombstone, and of course, it had to be a Ouija board. Yeah, if you have any words you want to say, any fan questions, bring your own easel, go ask away. Number 6, specimens. Specimens, yeah, not very large either. This one is a very small tombstone. This one is found in a cemetery near an Ohio asylum. There's actually 2 of these headstones. Both of them say specimens. Again, specimens, just that's it. The fact that these stones are the size of a shoebox also makes it even more chilling. This psychiatric facility was the first state-supported asylum in the US. Its history was dark in the early experimental treatment days, so perhaps these headstones could be body parts. You knew I was gonna say that. It's bad. It's all bad. The list gets worse, dare I say. Only halfway. Number 5, Midnight Mary. Mary E. Hart, more commonly referred to as Midnight Mary, had to be featured on this list. Back in 1872 in New Haven, Connecticut, Mary was supposedly buried alive. Yeah, accidentally. It wasn't anything horrible, although this is a pretty dark thing. It wasn't worse. Her stone has a lot of information, all things considered. The massive slab of pink stone reads, "At high noon, just from and about to renew her daily work, in her full strength and body and mind, Mary E. Hart, having fallen prostrate, remained unconscious until she died at midnight, October 15th, 1872. Born December 16th, 1824. And then right underneath, there's one line that reads, "The people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away." Again, you had us in the first half. The back 9 gets a little scary. Now, many have noted that this phrase is from the Old Testament, but tales of her being buried alive suggest that there might be a midnight curse hanging about this area. So if you live in this area, you now have a curfew. There you go. You have a curfew now. Go home. Number 4, Mary Jane McCune. Some of the details in this one I can't even talk about here on the Tube of You. It's really dark, really, really dark. Mary Jane McCune was the wife of one James Farrar. She was born in 1838 and passed away later in 1855. Quite young. Now, with many of these tombstones, they can be pretty sparse with details, like specimens, for example. Or you can explain as much as you can in that one block, spread awareness to the public. Like, you know, any lamp mishaps. Both can be haunting to read. Underneath Mary Jane's name and dates is a message on how she passed away. Mary Jane was bitten by a rabid coyote, developed rabies, became violent, and was smothered with feather bed. Wild. The story even recalls that the husband James was away for work at the time and found out what happened only when he got back. That is so tragic. That's the thing with these old resting places. They have tons of information because, well, that was it. That was your legacy. Literally written in stone. It's like so many characters or less to explain how you died horribly. Number 3, Eugene. Humans are odd, okay? Before we get into these last few, the ancient tombstone curses, you know, first we have to look back to 1929 and how not to preserve a mummy. Yeah, let's do it. 1929, Ohio, a corpse just appeared on the road out of nowhere. We love those. There was even an address found on this man's body, but it was an empty plot of land once they followed through. They had no name for this body, so they named him Eugene. Yeah, they named him after a local neighbor. Yeah, hey, we're gonna name this dead guy after you. Is that cool, Eugene? No? Well, too late. They used this body as an attraction. They gave it the mummy treatment, which in Ohio 1929 probably wasn't the best way, but they did it. And then 25 years later, you know, when more and more people started asking about this Ohio mummy, they laid the man to rest. Finally, they officially buried him in 1964. So now when you see this grave, it says, Eugene, found dead in 1929, buried 1964. I bet so many people are confused if they saw this. Send them this video and then type, "You won't believe number 3." They're like, what, do you work for MA? What is this guy doing? Why did he tell me to press the thumbs up? Who is this? Number 2, ancient tomb curse. Ancient Egyptian tombs are beautiful. Even after this many years, they're well preserved. Ancient Egyptians believed that false doors were a connection to the dead, and that's how spirits were able to travel here and there. Most false doors can be found in the west wall because Egyptians believed that the west was the land of the dead. The walls of ancient Egyptian tombs are also full of jewelry, art, clothing, basically anything valuable you may need in the afterlife to impress the gods. You're offering up your finest treasures. But with that comes a warning from these gods. One warning trespassers that the gods will wring their neck like that of a goose if you were to steal anything that wasn't yours in these tombs. Inside the found tomb of Ankh-Mahor, for example, who was a pharaoh official 4,000 years ago, inside their tomb a curse was left over. He was buried in Mastaba in an above ground massive tomb, and left on the wall was this warning: "Might do against this, my tomb, the same shall be done to your property." And then it continues to warn trespassers of Ankh-Mahor's knowledge of secret spells and magic, and threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing ghosts. Yeah, I think that ought to do the trick. Yeah, no way I'm messing with an ancient magician pharaoh. I'm good. I'm definitely all good. And finally, number 1, KB55. Yeah, we'll end this list on an ancient Egyptian tomb, with perhaps the most chilling message left over of all time. This tomb was found, of course, in the Valley of the Kings by Edward Ireton back in 1907. It was discovered right next to King Tut's tomb. This was a big deal. But the reason we refer to this tomb by a number rather than a name is because, well, we still have no idea who it was made for. Even the walls of the tomb inside, they aren't covered with any hieroglyphs, no artwork, no fake doors. There isn't any clothing laying around, there's no jewelry, it's just bare, which is extremely odd given what I just told you. As you walk down the 20 steps towards KB55, you'll notice only a few markings on the entrance, markings that show that the entrance was widened since it was first cut, along with the ceiling being raised higher. So adjustments were made at some point, meaning this was not a forgotten project by any means, which makes it creepier. The only hint as to who or what is buried remains on the wall, and it's one hieroglyph. That hieroglyph translates to, "The evil one shall not live again." Yeah, I sure hope not. I've seen The Mummy, and I really hope not. I'm all set. Cheers on that one.
Starting us off at number 10 is The Worker. Now this one is from Redditor Redbird274, who used to work as a groundskeeper at their local cemetery with their best friend back in high school. They found the usual things like stuffed animals on children's graves, flowers, liquor bottles, beer cans, etc. But there were also some weird ones, like Redbird found scribbled notes from a widow on her husband's grave which are all illegible. They found used condoms, which I don't know why that's a thing, but I'm not kink shaming, but I don't get it. One super creepy thing that they found was a plastic drink and wet baby doll that was burnt with what seemed like a blowtorch, and it also had a bunch of big nails hammered into its head. The user actually hung the head of it on their rear view mirror like a tassel, which is also a bit sus in and of itself. But anyway, the worst thing they found was a naked corpse of a girl who had been a student at a neighboring high school. Her arms were at her sides and she had been strangled right there, and whoever killed her had also punched her in the face several times. Her clothes were never found, and neither was her killer. The user and their best friend was interrogated several times, but to no avail. But either way, wow, just imagine going to work and seeing a corpse like that. I mean, yes, it's a graveyard, there are corpses everywhere, but this is different. Coming in at number 9 are The Children. This one's from Jim Watley, who said he went on a ghost tour with his wife a few years ago in St. Augustine, Florida. And this place happens to be one of America's oldest inhabited cities, just, you know, a little fact of the day for you. But anyway, one of the last stops on this ghost tour was an old cemetery where loads of people who had died from the yellow fever outbreak were buried. As the tour guide started telling the couple about the history of the cemetery, Jim saw some movement and he realized there were a bunch of children hiding behind the gravestones and looking over or around them at Jim and his wife. He paid no mind to them and thought maybe they were just kids playing around. But when they left, he complimented the tour guide on his visualizations of the children, and the guide asked him if he had seen them, and he said yes, and my wife did too. But then the tour guide said there was no one in the graveyard but him and the couple, but that this wasn't even the first time people had reported seeing children there. They happened to be in the section reserved for unknown kids who had died in the outbreak. I mean, not really a graveyard list if you don't see some ghosts, right? At number 8 we have The Chicken. One cemetery worker went into a shift one day to find a live chicken shackled to a gravestone, and that is literally all they said. That's all they shared. Like, I have many questions for you. How do you even shackle a chicken to a gravestone, and why would you even do that? People were speculating that perhaps it was part of some voodoo or ritualistic practice, but it left everyone reading it pretty dumbfounded. And also, poor chicken, like, what did it even do to deserve that? Filling our number 7 slot is The Man. This one's from Logan Browse, who said that during the mid-90s in Santa Fe, when he was about 16 or 17, him and his friends wanted something fun to do, so they started filming stuff. They decided to go to a cemetery near Cerritos Road at 1 AM and film themselves jumping over the fence and touching gravestones. Stupid, but sure, kids will be kids, I guess. The three of them jump the fence and start filming Blair Witch style whilst running, but then all of a sudden they saw someone get up from a grave, at which point the boys lost all confidence and ran back to the car. They jumped over the fence and back into the car, and the person or thing that got up from the grave was also coming towards them, towards the fence. It looked like a dirty man in a white sheet. They thought maybe he was freshly dead. They ended up actually going to the nearest gas station and calling the police. The police laughed and hung up on them when they told them that they had seen a walking corpse. This was before zombies were a big thing in pop culture, so Logan and his two friends were sat at home terrified, when really it was probably just a homeless man sleeping there. Let's be real. Now at number 6 is a sweet potato. I don't know, honestly, I don't make these up. But anyway, this one's from Paul Deso de Holzer, hopefully, who said he saw something ridiculously weird. He was in the cemetery where celebrated war hero General Francis Marion was buried because him and a few friends wanted to pay their respects. But on General Marion's tomb, they found a sweet potato, like literally a sweet potato. And it wasn't just a regular sweet potato. For one, it was hard and firm, meaning that A, it was fresh, and B, it was good for carving. It was carved so elaborately, someone had taken a lot of time to detail it with what looked like folk art or motifs. Paul believes it was part of a Santeria or voodoo spell ritual because it seemed to have symbolic importance. Either way, they didn't move the sweet potato, but just existed alongside of it. Coming in at number 5 is the skull. This one's from Chris Baldwin, who said when he was a boy he used to like playing around the grounds of St. Mellon's Church. He was about 9 or 10 years old when this happened, and it was about 1979 at the time. He said because a lot of the ground was overgrown, it was a great place for hide and seek. So he was hiding at the bottom of the grounds and had just squeezed through some old iron railings on the border of the church. He kicked a rock in the trees, but the kick actually really hurt him, and then when he looked down, he realized he hadn't kicked a rock at all but a human skull. He ran for his life. He ran away from the church and found a policeman and told him what had happened. A while later, police were everywhere examining the forest and documenting the area, but it turned out to be a person who had just committed and had been buried there. Because back then, if you had taken your own life, you weren't allowed to be buried within the church's grounds, you had to be buried right outside of them. And that is what Chris found and then kicked. At number 4 is the jar. This one's from Reddit user 16 Bells, who said in her local graveyard there's a gravesite that has a fetus in a jar next to it. These are just so weird, I don't understand. This was posted 4 years ago, but she went on to say the jar's been there since she was a kid, so God knows how many years it's been there for. For years, residents of the town have been told it's a fetus in a jar, but after all these years it no longer looks like one, so it can't really be proved anymore. I mean, unless someone takes it out and investigates it, but no one in the town dares to touch it, and I mean, that's understandable. Either way, I wonder why it was left there. Maybe the gravesite was of a father and the wife had a stillborn and wanted them to be together? Who knows, like that's the only story I could come up with. No clue of any backstory. Let me know what you guys think. Maybe you'll come up with something better. Filling our number 3 slot is The Lady. This one was shared by Lauren Smith, who said when she was about 14 she participated in a living history weekend in Franklin, Tennessee. So everybody got to dress up in cool period clothes and it was pretty lit really. On Saturday night, Lauren and her friends thought it'd be fun to walk around the grounds of one of the largest Confederate cemeteries. It was 3 AM at this point and the group were just laughing and joking when they saw something moving amongst the headstones. It was a woman dressed in all white period clothes. She had her head down but just kept aimlessly walking through the gravestones, not really having a destination in mind. One of the girls in the group said it was probably just her mum playing a prank on them, trying to make them run back to their tents and go to sleep, so the girls paid no mind to the incident. But a few minutes later they headed back to the camp and the girl opened her mum's tent to show it being empty to the other girls, but her mum was very much in there and asleep. There was no way her mum could have gotten back that quickly without at least passing the girls, so that girl that they saw definitely wasn't the mum. When they looked back, the woman was also gone from the cemetery, and Lauren till this day cannot explain what she saw. I mean, was it real? Was it an apparition? A ghost? Not a clue. Not a faintest clue. Now at number 2 is fire. This one's from Shaheen Ibrahim, who said that he once knew a holy man from his community who was visiting a graveyard one day and was paying his respects. A little while later, out of nowhere, a grave combusted. It full on went up in flames, no No one was around the grave, there was nothing that could have started it, no flammable liquid or object, no trigger, it just happened like magic. And it wasn't a tiny fire, flames were quote unquote leaping out of it. I mean, I've seen that happen in movies where fire just comes out of nowhere, but real life at a graveyard? How is it possible? Shaheen theorized powers above us were behind it, but the significance behind it is still a cliffhanger. And finally, at number 1 are the footprints. This one's from Jay Arden, who said in his teens him and his sister and friends decided to go to a large cemetery after watching a horror movie. Recipe for disaster right there. But anyway, they knew there was one mausoleum in a local cemetery that had a lot of well-known dark stories about it, so they thought that would be the perfect place to go. Despite it snowing, they made it there, and at this point their windows were pretty foggy and visibility was at an all-time low. And that is the weather forecast, that's what that just sounded like. Jay was the one voted on to check out the mausoleum even though he was the youngest in the car. Pure savagery. But anyway, as he walked towards it, he realized the snow had been pushed back by the door. The door had been opened, yet there was only one set of footprints leaving the crypt. There were no footprints leading into the mausoleum, just one fresh set coming out. But the iron door had a rusty chain on it securing it shut, which meant it had been sealed for quite a long time. So no one knows what the hell came out of the place, perhaps a century-old vampire who thought it was finally time to wake up. Either way, the kids left but couldn't find anyone around the area that may have left those tracks.
Coming into number 10, we have Alabama's Dead Children's Playground. In Alabama, there is a playground across the road from Maple Hill Cemetery in Huntsville. Apparently, Maple Hill is the oldest cemetery in the area and is home to a lot of bodies. A playground across from the cemetery seems kind of morbid, but it seems that it was probably built as a distraction for kids whose parents wanted to visit the graveyard to pay respects to their loved ones. That may have been what the playground was intended for, but that is not how residents use it. I say residents, but by that I mean the residents of the Maple Hill Cemetery. It seems that local legend has it that children buried in the graveyard come out at night and use the play equipment. The living have reported hearing children's laughter, swings and roundabouts moving on their own, and orbs of light travelling down the slide. Whilst the graveyard has been there since 1822, meaning there are some very old dead child spirits, apparently the area is also close by to a place where a number of murdered children were found in the 1960s. Either way, however the young died, it is rumoured that they enjoy playing together here in the area. The ground was going to be torn down in 2007 to make way for more graves, but public outcry led to the playground being updated, so new swings and slides for the ghosts. Yay! Coming into number 9, we have the cursed grave of Carl Pruitt. Carl Pruitt his adulterous wife and then in 1938. Legend has it that following that, his grave in Pulaski County, Kentucky has become cursed. His tombstone was oddly discoloured, attracting attention from local kids who rode their bikes near the cemetery. One of the kids threw a rock at the graves as a laugh, and later he died by falling off his bike when his bike chain strangled him. The boy's mother, hearing about the rocks on the grave and Pruitt's past, went a bit mad and hit his grave with an axe. The gravestone was unscathed, but it is said that she was some days later when she mysteriously got herself wrapped up in a clothesline. A farmer and a policeman also died when they accidentally disturbed the grave. In 1940, a local vigilante decided to smash up the grave in a bid to exhume Pruitt's body and end the curse. He then also died in a freak accident when he was by a chain lock. Coming into number 8, we have the mysterious Tu Wang Cemetery. The Tu Wang Cemetery is home to a whole bunch of urban legends. What is it about this Brisbane cemetery that's generated so many weird goings on? While there are a whole bunch to pick from, let's talk about Avenue 12 in the cemetery. Firstly, Avenue 12 seems to be the home to a ghost vampire called Lily. She's supposed to wander around at night, a beautiful woman with dark hair and 19th century clothing. She appeared after a grave was reportedly exhumed, showing a weird preserved body with very long fangs. Also causing chaos on Avenue 12 are a pair of sisters who died in a car accident on a hill near the cemetery. The pair was said to have lost control of their car on that hill. These days, if a car is parked at the bottom of the hill, it's said that the dead sisters of the cemetery will drag it back up. One you might know up next. Coming in at number 7, we have the whole urban legend of somebody walked on my gravestone. Have you ever been just going about your life, then you unexpectedly have a little shiver and someone says to you, "Ooh, someone walked over your grave." The urban legend suggests that somewhere in a far off distant future, you are long buried in the ground, but somehow your senses as you lay there worm food are still connected to your daily life. This folk legend stems back to the 18th century England, when people believed more heavily in superstitions and the afterlife. People genuinely believed that they shuddered because someone had walked over their future grave. Obviously, if that was true, we would all be shuddering all day long. People still believe in an unexpected shiver these days. They still think it's related to their grave. It's really weird. This is perhaps why the superstition of not stepping on other people's graves is in effect. I don't do it, but mainly out of respect. Coming into number 6, we have the legend of the Devil's Chair. The Devil's Chair in urban legends says that the seats in graveyards are reserved or occupied by spirits. They are much less common now, but old ornate stone-looking chairs in graveyards used to be a popular thing. They were often called mourning chairs or monubenches for the purposes of letting mourners take a seat. Some gravestones, however, were incorporated into a part of the headstone design. Either way, I have to agree that these are really old and creepy. Legend has it that at night, ghosts will sit in these chairs, or even the devil. Either way, people tend to agree that the chair is haunted. A number of these chairs have legends of their very own. For example, there is a well-known devil's chair in Ulverston, Cumbria, and one in Casadaga. Never ever step on this gravestone at number 5. We have the victim of the beast. The beast seems to have been rife in Utah. If you visit the Salt Lake City Cemetery, you might not want to leave any flowers on Lily E. Graves' grave. Or I don't know, maybe it would appease the beast. Why? Well, let's have a look at her gravestone, shall we? It seems that Lily, who died in November 1958, aged 77, was a victim of the beast, or so her gravestone says. They even added a 666 at the end of the sentence just to make it clear which beast she fell foul of. Weirdly, her husband is also buried at the same cemetery, but very far away from his wife's corpse. The urban legend varies on this one, but some people say that she was a Satanist, and other people say that she died as a sacrifice to Satan. Remember earlier when we talked about stepping on gravestones and how you should never do it? Well, you should especially never step on this grave. Local legend has it that not only was Lily a victim of the beast, her tombstone is haunted, and stepping on it will bring a person bad luck. The website WeirdUS.com claims that a woman who walked on the grave later had an accident in her car. If you ask around in the area, locals will delight in telling you all about the misfortune that befalls people who mistreat the grave. We have another one from Salt Lake City up next. We have the legend of Jean Baptiste. He was a grave robber, and he's coming in at number 4. A Utah legend has it that the Great Salt Lake is haunted by a famous body snatcher. In the 1800s, Jean Baptiste was illicitly employed as a grave digger in Salt Lake City. You would imagine that it would be hard to screw up an illegal job, but he managed to do it. Not only was he on the wrong side of the law, he was doing his illegal job badly. He would dump corpses and steal their clothes. When the local graveyard found their graves had been ransacked, they set up surveillance, and lo and behold, Jean Baptiste had been stealing corpses in wheelbarrows. He was taking their possessions, then dumping the bodies and selling their jewelry. In his home, he even made drapes and furniture covers out of their clothing, which is really creepy. When authorities caught him, he was banished to live on an island on Salt Lake. Now apparently the grave robber can still be seen there clutching a bundle of soggy rotten clothing and looking for more bodies to dig up. Coming in at number 3, we have the stain on Colonel Jonathan Buck's tomb. Jonathan Buck gave his name to the town of Bucksport in Maine after being one of their first settlers. His job was that he was a justice of the peace and that he had to sentence some people to death. Buck's tombstone is still maintained at the Bucksport Cemetery, where visitors to his grave will spot a weird leg-shaped stain. Local legend has it that the stain is the mark of the leg and foot of a witch that Buck sentenced to death in the late 1700s. Apparently, as the woman was being burned, one of her legs rolled out from the fire. The witch is said to have cursed Buck and his tomb with a leg-shaped stain for the injustice he served to her. Legend has it that the stain has even been removed on several occasions, but it keeps on coming back. Spooky. Coming into number 2, we have the dancing blue lights of Silver Cliff Cemetery. Silver Cliff is an old silver mining town in Colorado. The mine is now closed and much of the old town has been relocated to a slightly different spot, but the Silver Cliff Cemetery remains where it always was and contains the graves of people going back to the 1870s. Something weird happens in the cemetery at night, and it has been the topic of much conversation and debate for decades. It seems that many people have reported seeing dancing blue lights at night and some white orbs floating through the cemetery and bouncing off the headstones. The light has caused such a stir that they were even featured in a 1969 publication of National Geographic. The lights were first seen by miners and have been a matter of local and international legend ever since. Many now flock to the cemetery to try and catch a glimpse of the phenomenon. Some people explain that the lights are reflections from the town, but actually the orbs have been noted since before the town had electricity. Is it ghosts? Like maybe aliens, possibly fairies? Finally, coming into number 1, we have the 100 Steps Cemetery. The 100 Steps Cemetery is located in the Indiana town of Brazil. Yep. Brazil, Indiana. The cemetery dates back to the 1860s and contains a creepy set of stairs that have all but been swallowed by the grass. It is said that there are 100 steps to the top of the cemetery, and if you climb them and count them as you go, when you get to the top, you'll be visited by the ghost of an undertaker. This ghost will show the visitor a vision of their death, so basically they'll see how they are set to die. The person is then supposed to walk back down the steps, and if they count the same number as they did on the way up, the vision was false. But if they count the wrong number of steps, that's how they'll die. The plot thickens if a visitor of the graveyard decides not to climb the 100 steps and walk up the other side of the hill instead. It's been reported that people are knocked down by a ghostly invisible force. Now this ghostly force is said to leave a large red handprint on the person's back.
Starting us off with number 10 are the letters. Now, this one was shared by Hot Sheet Motel on Reddit, who used to work as a groundskeeper at a cemetery back in the 70s. He shared that he used to find so many weird miscellaneous items at the graveyard, but the creepiest thing he found were a series of scribbled letters that a widow kept leaving on her husband's grave. She would tear them out from a reporter's notebook and they were virtually illegible. The user could not make out what any of the sentences meant, but could read certain words like revenge, Antichrist, and sacrifice, which I don't even know if I want to know what she was talking about. I feel like we should just leave that. Let's just pretend it never happened. I don't need that in my life right now. 2019 was bad enough without the Antichrist coming in. Coming in at number 9 is the body. Not dead, but plot twist, still alive. Back in September of 2009, a mourner found 71-year-old Donald Constantine Jackson's unconscious, bloody and beaten body at the Pine Hills Cemetery. He was rushed to the hospital but died a few days later due to his injuries, and around the same time, a 26-year-old man called Mojave Takley from Toronto turned himself in on charges of first-degree murder of Donald. Apparently, an unidentified girl got into an argument with Donald, and when he tried walking away from her, she followed him to the cemetery where Mojave then joined her. He then beat Donald before they both fled the scene. Imagine going to the cemetery to mourn a deceased relative and finding a half-dead person yourself. I'd be shook, but also why would you beat up a 71-year-old man? Like, what are people thinking? Honestly, what are people thinking? At number 8, we have anti-Semitism. So back in March of this year, countless graves at a Jewish cemetery in Massachusetts were vandalized with anti-Semitic hate messages. Things like "Hitler was right," "This is MAGA country," "Expel the Jew," and "Oy vey." Upon further investigation, police also found swastikas and other anti-Semitic graffiti scratched into the backs of tombstones. Not even just written, full on scratched and carved in. Like, that's so shocking and racist. And I feel like Louis Gitlan, a man who has relatives buried at the cemetery, summed up the incident quite well. He said these people face persecution through their whole lives. What do they go through to get to this place and finally be free, then realize they can't escape it ever? Say less, Louis, say less, I agree with you. Filling at number 7 slot is the chicken. An now deleted user on Reddit shared that he was a cemetery worker and he went into his shift one day to find a live chicken shackled to a gravestone. And that is literally all he shared. Like, I have so many questions. How do you even shackle a live chicken to a gravestone, and why would you even do that? People were speculating that perhaps it was part of some voodoo or ritualistic practice, because many do involve live chickens in some way or another. Other commenters went further and said it was Santeria practice. People who follow this religion offer an orisha, which is a spirit similar to God, food, and they also sacrifice animals to them so they can build and maintain a powerful relationship with that spirit. It's not to bring them closer in worship in any way, but to make them more aware of the orisha within them. So perhaps the person who died was part of this faith and their fellow worshippers were trying to bring the deceased peace in their afterlife. I don't really know. But that is a message if I ever saw one. A live chicken. I don't want that kind of message. know. Now at number 6 is the premonition. This was shared by Maddie Barnett, who shared she usually feels quite at home in graveyards. Weird flex, but okay. She said her and her partner did a road trip back to Dubu in 2017 and ended up staying at a hotel about a block away from a cemetery. One day when her partner was napping, she decided to explore and went to the graveyard. She was walking by the tombstones and saying hello to them, and from a distance she saw this marble angel that she was just instantly drawn to. When she reached the angel, she looked at the name on the grave and her heart stopped. The name read Madison Barnett, which was her name, but the thing is there was no year of death on the tomb, which she thought was very odd. There usually is. Freaking out, she rushed back to the hotel, woke up her partner and took them to the graveyard to see it for themselves. But when they got to the angel, it didn't say Madison Barnett anymore, it was a different girl's name. Maddie just couldn't figure out how she had so clearly seen her name 10 minutes beforehand and now it was just so clearly gone. She and her partner speculated that it was a premonition or message of some kind telling her that she was soon to be next. That is a message I never want to receive in my life ever. Thankfully I have a very uncommon name, so hopefully I never see my name on another tombstone that's not me. Coming in at number 5 is the voodoo. This one was shared by Reddit user Closet Psycho, who said she's not a cemetery worker, but she did used to visit a loved one in her local graveyard every single week. One day when she was going, she noticed something very off. On every third grave, someone or some people had left red candles. Along with the red candles on certain graves, not all of them, they had also created circles made from beads around the gravestones. The user's father's grave was included in that category and they were 100% sure it was some ritual of some kind. Either that or they were sending a message to the spirits of the graveyard saying either stay away from these specific graves or target these specific graves. One or the other, there's no in between. Either way, the user disposed of the things on their dad's grave ASAP and alerted the groundskeepers straight away. At number 4 is the eggplant. This one was shared by Reddit user Punha Townie, who said 30 minutes before a funeral started, an unidentified person showed up and was just standing near the freshly dug grave. Which isn't really weird. I mean, many people come early to funerals and mourn in their own way. Maybe they want privacy. It wasn't really setting off any alarm bells for the user. But 10 minutes later, the user got a call from their manager saying someone had put something inside the grave, not the body. Confused, the user went to investigate and found an eggplant with holes in it, and those holes were stuffed with strips of paper and a picture. The user was dumbfounded but also thought perhaps it was a Santeria ritual, the same religion I mentioned in the chicken story. But either way, how long did this person think the eggplant was gonna last before it decayed? Like, what was the purpose of this? Someone commented saying the eggplant is a belladonna herb, and since it was left there to rot and sour, that's most likely what the person wanted to do to their target. Which, I mean, that's salty. I mean, they've already died. You don't need to add insult to injury, just let them die. You've already won. You're alive. Filling our number 3 slot is the Victor, and back in July of 2010 at 5 PM, a woman was on the main path of Pine Hill Cemetery. And mind you, 5 PM is a pretty safe time to be out, you'd assume, especially in the summer where it doesn't get dark at like 4 PM like it does now. The woman was dragged off the path by a man later identified as 44-year-old sex offender Russell Kirkpatrick. Russell then proceeded to rape and beat her till she was unconscious and then left her there to presumably die. She was found 5 hours later trying to cling onto some kind of a life and get up from the ground and was quickly taken to the hospital. Thankfully, enough tips came in to lead to Kirkpatrick's arrest and the woman did end up surviving. But wow, how many half-alive bodies are we gonna find at cemeteries, you guys? And what kind of scum of the earth do you have to be to rape someone and on top of that rape them while they're trying to mourn a loved one? Scumbag. Now at number 2 are the crosses. This one was shared by Redditor Patrick R's Ghost, who's not a cemetery worker but just an avid ghost hunter. Now Patrick was walking through a cemetery he was interested in when he came upon an interesting looking grave. Tell me how many times I've said interesting in this video, you guys, comment below. Now this grave had glass beads on the side of it in parallel lines, it had an arrangement of different toys on the grave itself, and there was a small ring of stones lining the back of the gravestone. But the weirdest part was that there were cross necklaces plunged into the ground all around the grave in a circle. I don't know what kind of message that was, but apparently the user said sometimes that's done so the human soul can transcend to their destination safely. But a circle of cross necklaces is very specific. I feel like that was also a message to ward off evil spirits from this specific person, to show that this person is protected very heavily by cross necklaces and toys and other things. And finally, at number 1 is the body. So this one was also shared by Redditor Hot Sheet Motel, the graveyard groundskeeper from the 70s. He said the worst thing he ever came across was the naked corpse of a girl his age that went to a neighboring high school in the area. He found her with her arms neatly at her sides and noticed strangulation marks on her neck. The killer also punched her several times in the face before she actually died, and the person left a small note in her hand that read "good luck." The girl was identified, but the murder itself was never solved, and her clothes were also never found. The user was questioned multiple times by the police, but obviously he didn't know anything about it. Now I'm confused though, because was it the killer that left that note in her hand and that was meant to be like a good luck finding me sort of thing, or had the girl been part of some kind of blackmail and she had been clutching the good luck note from a previous message she received? Like, I don't know the backstory. It's a bit sus.